David Katz is a former assistant U.S. attorney. He joins us now, as does Peter Mathews, a professor of political science at Cypress College, both joining us from Los Angeles. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. David, to you first. Democrats want to see the full report without redactions, and they've issued a subpoena to get it. Do you feel that you are missing vital information from the report that we currently have? Right now, it's about 10% redacted.
Well, I think there shouldn't be even that 10% redacted. And there are certain means, like going to the court that supervised the grand jury so they can get the grand jury records. And the definition of who are peripheral third parties, they may not really be that peripheral. And so I think not only Congress, but the public should see that. And then there's certainly some factual matters that they're going to want to get into. They're going to want to call Don McGahn. They're going to want to call Mueller, the other witnesses that they've mentioned. And they're also going to want to subpoena documents, which makes sense. This is the normal process by which the checks and balances work and where the president is not above the law. The normal process in American history has not been indictment. It's been impeachment, Cyril.
I understand it makes sense from a legal perspective to want to see everything and to want the underlying evidence. But, you know, Donald Trump makes the argument that whatever you give the public, whatever is released, Democrats will always want more. And at the end of the day, this report is very comprehensive, and it is 90% available to us, unredacted. Doesn't that kind of make the president's argument when the Democrats are saying, well, we want to see the 10% that are remaining?
Well, no, for 2 years, Congress, both houses were controlled by Republicans. There really wasn't oversight. There was just burying any information that might be out there. Now is the House's first opportunity under Democratic control to subpoena what they view as necessary and to see everything that needs to be seen. Now, some of it may be in closed session. It may be shown only to the chiefs of the intelligence committees, but that should be as little as possible, because what's shown to the chiefs of the intelligence committees can't be shared. They're talking about having them go into a room, like during the Kavanaugh hearings, and just look in a closed room without aides, without being able to take notes, and without disclosing it to the public. This is a chance to have a public accounting of what happened with the president, with attacks by Russia on our election, and by obstruction of justice, which, by the way, is very clearly spelled out. And if it were anyone other than the president, I think your viewers would agree that someone who committed what the president is detailed for having done should be indicted, and would be convicted by a jury of his peers.
But the president is held to a different legal standard, as the special counsel quite clearly spelled out in his report. Peter, on the political side of things, do you think that Democrats should seriously pursue impeachment?
Well, let's first of all look at impeachment, Cyril. It's not a legal issue. It's actually a political one, in the sense that originally the King of England could not be impeached, but his ministers could. And the Parliament could remove the ministers. In fact, some of them were removed for just giving out a friend a military commission and giving bad advice. So it's a political situation where if the president has violated his oath of office to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and if he's obstructed justice, he's not faithfully executing the laws, he's actually obstructing the laws from being executed, and he's tried to fire people. Mueller, he tried to fire him. He told Mr. McGahn to go and tell him to tell...
Ultimately, he didn't, though.
He didn't, ultimately, but that's because his subordinate disobeyed him. If his subordinates had actually obeyed the president, he would be in real violation of obstruction of justice right now, and he would be removed, possibly. At least impeachment would be more right on the horizon. I think that's very important that Congress actually starts the investigation for the impeachment proceedings, to look to see if there's evidence to vote for article of impeachment. It's very important to get to that, and they should not shrink from that, and they should not make it a partisan issue. Should not say, well, because there's not a Republican, there's only a Republican Senate, we can't really do it. No, it's a step-by-step process. The Congress and the House starts it, and the Senate gets to actually hear the trial and have a conviction vote or not. They shouldn't look at it on a partisan basis at all.
Well, Elizabeth Warren, as you know, is the first 2020 presidential candidate who has officially called for impeachment. I want to touch on something you said, which I find very interesting. And I want to pull up a quote by the editorialist Bret Stephens in the New York Times to your point about how the non-firing of Robert Mueller may have been accidental. He says, Trump's absolution by Mueller did not come about because his intentions were innocent, but because his aims were thwarted or his methods were incompetent. And he gives several examples, the first one of which is, if his own staff hadn't blocked him from firing Mueller, he would have done so. Peter, do you feel that this could all easily have gone very differently if certain key members of the administration had reacted differently or perhaps done what the president had asked them to do?
Absolutely so, because if they had followed the president's advice and done that, then he would be culpable, and it would be so clear that he had ordered something illegal and unconstitutional. So he was saved by his own staff inadvertently, and I think it's time that the House starts the investigation process and give a fair hearing to it. It's not a kangaroo court we're talking about. We're talking about the ultimate grand jury of the United States, the House of Representatives, which is listed in the Constitution as being the grand jury to decide whether there's enough evidence to put him on trial or not. This needs to begin quite soon. I'm with Elizabeth Warren on this one.
But real quick, before I get back to David, this is a political question. David, the Democrats want to win the next election in 2020. This may not be the best way to do that. Impeachment,
it may not. It may not be the best way, but this is not an issue of winning an election. This has to do with rule of law principle.
Well, go and tell that to Nancy Pelosi, who so far has ruled out impeachment unless there's consensus.
Yeah, but there are other Democrats who are standing on principle and are actually doing this, or saying we should do it. And I think that we should listen to them and find out why we should go forward this way or not.
David, as far as next steps, we just discussed the possibility of impeachment and that political process, but the special counsel also hinted pretty heavily in his report that Mr. Trump could actually be indicted once he's no longer in office. Now, how do you see that happening? How would that work, and who would have the authority to do that?
Well, it's very clear that the president and others could be indicted as long as the statute of limitations hasn't run once President Trump were no longer in office. And of course, that could occur by January 2021. I do think a lot of the wind will be out of the sails, because I agree that it's a terrible problem with the rule of law. It's a terrible precedent if a president can do all of these things, and just because of the Department of Justice rule that a sitting president shouldn't be indicted but should be impeached, and there wasn't time to impeach, that basically he got away with it, Donald Trump Jr. got away with it. But as bad a precedent as that would be, I think the wind would be kind of out of the sails if Trump were no longer the president. I think that's the reality. Now, meanwhile, the Southern District of New York is continuing to pursue criminal cases. I don't think that this man Barr would ever approve an indictment of the president. I don't think he would ever approve one of the president's son. But there are investigations that are going on of the Michael Cohen payment of hush money. Remember, the president was singled out in that case as being an unindicted co-conspirator. The president was noted as having ordered Cohen, his former attorney, to make those hush money payments at the time that he was still the president's attorney, and then to cover it up. So that's being investigated. There's also the whole problem with the inauguration. You know, $50 million has disappeared from the inauguration fund. That would be a violation of the law by whoever was involved in that. There's the Trump Tower meeting, which, you know, a lot of people think that while we admire Mueller and we're glad for his service the last 2 years, that he kind of wimped out on not charging Donald Trump Jr., because it seemed like a pretty open and shut case. To think that he didn't have it in his mind to understand that you can't receive help from a foreign government. I mean, come on, Cyril, you and I have never worked on a presidential campaign, but we would know that you cannot take money from a foreign adverse power and cover it up and not report it to the FBI, and then to have this crazy cover story that your daddy prepared on an airplane and told a story about. I mean, we're sensible people here, and I think Mueller could have proven the criminal intent on Donald Trump Jr. I know when I was a prosecutor and I worked under President Reagan along with Adam Schiff, he and I worked in the same office, we were colleagues. I think both of us would have charged that case.
Yeah, and certainly Mueller addresses that question in quite some detail in his report, multiple pages devoted to that. And he explains that in his mind, that's just not an indictable offense, that there wasn't you can't prove the intent and the knowledge of the law that they might have been breaking.
But you know what happened was that he also took the Fifth Amendment. The president's son took the Fifth Amendment. The president himself refused to talk about it or be interviewed about it at all. That's what really happened here. And also documents were destroyed regarding this investigation. And they're going to get to the bottom of that in the House. That's what the House is supposed to do.
David Katz, Peter Mathews, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks.
You're welcome.